Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to explain what is meant by the gradient of a line and how we can figure it out if we have a coordinate axes, if we have a grid obviously of squares, right? So what is the gradient of a line? What does that even mean? Well, there's a couple of things that we need to sort of sort out before we can talk about that. So gradient of a line. So I'm just going to draw a couple of lines here. Right, so there you go, two straight lines. So this is all about straight lines. Obviously, I should have probably used a ruler, but we're just going to pretend these are straight lines, right? And so the question is, which one of these is going uphill and which one of these is going downhill? Or does it, or could it be either? So you pause the video, have a think. Right, I'm going to assume you've now resumed the video. So, before I actually tell you the answer, I think it's pretty clear that it kind of depends, right? If I'm going from down here to up there, if I'm going left to right, then this is going uphill. Like if you were a person and this was a hill, and you were down here and you wanted to get up here, you'd be going uphill. However, if you were up here and you wanted to get down here and you were going from right to left, you'd be going downhill. So, you know, you could, like if you've answered, well, it depends, like fair enough. Yeah, you're right, it does depend. Equally, this one is downhill from left to right, but it's uphill from right to left, right? If you start over here on the right and you want to get up here, which is to the left, you've gone uphill. Now, what's really important that we're going to assume from now on is, certainly when we're talking about the gradient of a line and just line graphs in general, is we are always talking about left to right, like a number line, going from it's kind of mirrored on the screen. So going from over here down here in the negatives to 0 up to the positives, right? Now it's kind of confusing for me because it's backwards, but anyway, hopefully you get the idea. So we're always talking about going left to right. And there is never any kind of there shouldn't be ever any confusion about that. Okay, so we're always talking about going left to right. So we are always talking about going in this direction, which means that actually in the context of this, it's totally well defined. This one here is going uphill and this one here is going downhill. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's the first thing I want to say. Okay, now if it's going uphill, then it is said to have a positive gradient. The gradient is positive if it is a line that is going uphill. Left to right. We are always talking about left to right. So I'm not even going to say that anymore, okay? You just have to remember we're always talking about left to right. And like an x-axis, right? Like an x-axis. So if you've got a straight line, it's sloping uphill from left to right, it's got a positive gradient. And if it's sloping downhill from left to right, it's got a negative gradient. Okay, so positive gradient means we're going uphill, negative gradient means we're going downhill. What do you think a 0 gradient would mean? Because you got positive gradient, you got negative gradient. What about the number in the middle of the positives and negatives? What's a 0 gradient? Again, pause the video, have a think. Now you've resumed the video, super. 0 gradient is a flat line. Obviously, kind of depends on the angle. I mean, if I rotate the paper, now it looks like it's going downhill. But anyway, this is supposed to be totally flat. Okay, so if it's totally flat, this would have 0 gradient. Or you could say the gradient is 0. Okay? So, and this is where it's a bit difficult because obviously it's backwards for me. So when I have my arm like that, that's a negative gradient from your perspective. Right? Because from left to right, it's going downhill. And then I would start to make the gradient, or start to sort of flatten it off, make it less steep. I mean, you know, ideally the ground you walk on is flat. That's the easiest thing to walk on. So 0 gradient is flat, and now I'm starting to be a positive gradient. Okay? And if it's ever perfectly vertical, it kind of doesn't have a defined gradient. Okay, it's kind of like an error, basically. Okay, it doesn't actually have a gradient, or you could say it's an infinite gradient. Okay, but don't worry too much about that. What we want is we want to have a bit of uphill, but not perfectly vertical, or we're allowed to be flat, or we could be going downhill. Okay, so that's the first thing. So all a gradient is a measure. So it's just a number. It's just a number. It doesn't have any units. It's just a number telling you how steep a line is. It's another word for steepness. Okay, so gradient is steepness. So, you know, when we talk about things that are really, really steep, you know, you don't want to walk up them, or you don't want to walk down them either. You know, try walking down a really, really, really steep hill. Like it's not the same challenge as walking up a really, really steep hill, but it's still challenging. And it's impossible to walk up a perfectly vertical hill. Like, you really need climbing equipment at that point. The easiest type of hill, if you want to call it's not even a hill at this point, is obviously a totally flat line with 0 gradient, 0 steepness. Okay? So gradient is steepness, and it's just a number. Okay? And it's positive if it's going uphill, and it will be negative if it's going downhill, and it will be 0 if it's totally flat. Okay, so this is like the absolute basics of what a gradient is. So what I might do is actually end this video here. I might just call it basics of a gradient, and then start recording the second video straight away, because I think I want to split this up into a few videos. So if this has helped you at all, if this has helped clarify anything, leave a like, and go and start watching the next video.